So welcome again. We're thrilled that you're with us. We are just a group of 4 of us that are taping these shows on GPS. We don't always have exactly the same group, but we, at least this time, have a theology student, Andrew Gorhughes, who I wish you could hear the questions that come up between the taping of the shows. Those are as much fun as what we do on the show. So we may have some of that here today. Anyway, Dr. John Pauline, the president, chair of the School of Religion here at Loma Linda University, Pastor Sarah Mae Colon is our youth pastor at Garden Grove. Anyway, we're in the second church of the 7 churches of Revelation 2. Take a moment and find your phone, or find a Bible, and just do this with us. We are going to give you some background, I think, that Dr. Pauline knows the most about. But we're going to wrestle with a couple questions and hope that you'll engage with us and just be open and do the best you can to take these passages and bring them into the real world with real questions that show up right here. So, John, just jump right to this. We know that you have commentaries and books on this. You have some background on this whole persecution that they're going through in the Church of Smyrna and in the early church in the 1st century. And we want to apply it today. Every generation has applied this passage in their time for 2,000 years.
Well, the most famous martyr of the 2nd century was in Smyrna. That's Polycarp.
Yes.
And that's a story I think that most people are familiar with. This
is being burned at the stake for not saying Caesar was Lord.
All right, exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
So what was happening around the time that Revelation was written was that the situation of Christians was changing. Up until that time, they'd been under the umbrella of Judaism, but that kind of unraveled after AD 70 when Jerusalem was destroyed, and the Christians were blamed for that because they all left. They escaped Jerusalem. They didn't stand with the other Jews. And so people began to separate the Christians and the Jews separated the Christians in their minds and found ways to get them out of the synagogue. So Christians were now exposed to Gentile accusations. And it's interesting that the Gentiles called them atheists. Now, why would they do that? Because they wouldn't respect the Roman gods. See, they are atheists. They don't believe in other people's gods but their own. So that became a term. They called them cannibals. And it's probably from some kind of misunderstanding of the Lord's Supper. But there were a number of traumatic events. You had the persecutions of Nero. That was the first time that Christians were systematically targeted in large numbers. And that was just a few years before Revelation. You have the imperial cult, which is kind of a new thing, kind of maybe started with Nero and became more prevalent in the time when Revelation was written. But that's the idea that the emperor is a god, and therefore direct worship to the emperor is necessary. And if you don't do that, then that's a problem. In Pergamos, we'll hear about Antipas as one Christian who was recently martyred. So there's a lot of things going on. Destruction of Jerusalem, a lot of things going on right in the immediate past of Revelation that has Christians really concerned. So this talk about there's things you're about to suffer and that there's Jews that are giving you a hard time and so on, this was real. This was speaking to a real situation at the time. Now, to get the context, you had a letter from a governor right around the time of Revelation, just a little bit after. Governor writes the emperor a letter, and he says, when people or Christians are brought to me, here's what I do. He says, I have asked the accused whether they are Christians. If they confessed, I asked a second and a third time, threatening penalties. Those who persisted, I ordered to be executed. For I did not doubt that whatever they professed, they deserved to be punished for their inflexible obstinacy.
Oh, wow.
Do we know what year roughly this is?
109, about 15 years after Revelation is written.
Wow.
And in Asia Minor. So, I mean, it's not far from these 7 churches. It sounds a little like today. The one religion that's not acceptable today is Christianity because it is inflexibly obstinate. Nothing new under the sun. I dismissed those who said they were not or never had been Christians and who in my presence supplicated the gods and placed wine and incense before your image, O emperor. Anyway, the emperor wrote back, and he generally confirmed what Pliny had said, but he gave a couple of provisos, and this is where it gets interesting. One of them was, don't seek them out. So the empire at this time is not trying to persecute Christians. The emperor said, don't seek them out. I'm not interested in that. And he says, don't accept anonymous accusations. But if a neighbor comes and says, I know this guy and here's the real deal, you got to deal with it, and deal with it the way that you did. So for Christians, the crucial thing was getting along with their neighbors. And in order to get along with your neighbor, how far could you go with your neighbor's parties, with your neighbor's activities, etc.? How far do you go to keep good relations with your neighbors?
What if they just saw you walking off to church on Saturday?
Well, if you are not on good terms with your neighbors, that might be all it would take. You see, if the neighbors loved you, then you're not in trouble. So the whole persecution thing in the time of Revelation was related to how you got along with your neighbors to a large degree. And so the folk there were divided. There were some who said, you know, you just absolutely no compromise. And then there were others, like the Nicolaitans, who said, well, you know, is it so bad to go to a party where the food was offered to an idol? I mean, Paul himself said an idol is nothing. So if I go have a steak once a year, is that going to kill me? You know, it's kind of what they're saying. And the whole thing about immorality, you see that in the next letter, that Christians were tempted to immorality. That was not promiscuity, but it was rather politicized, programmatic visits to a prostitute. That was part of a whole idea that if you had sex in the temple, that the gods would mirror that, and then there would rain, and there would be great crops, and things would go great, you see. And so the Nicolaitans were not saying, you know, throw out the 10 Commandments, throw out all this, but in a specific context, they were saying, you know, we don't have to be on the outs. We don't have to lose all of our political status. We don't have to lose all of our financial opportunities. We don't have to be impoverished. We can actually be part of society. It's just a couple little things. How far do you go? So that's the challenge.
I want to push back on you a little bit. When you were talking, you mentioned that Christianity still today is like a non-accepted religion. And I want to disagree, at least within our Western United States of America context. I think that Islam is the religion that undergoes the most persecution right now.
He didn't say it was persecuted. He said we're obstinate. Isn't that what he said?
Right, but I understood that the implication was that Christianity still, in some sense, undergoes judgment, or people have to be careful about whether they stay true to God or take part in larger forms of society, if you will. And that's a battle for each person personally, with personal integrity. But I wonder, Revelation, and maybe this conversation will come later with some different chapters, but is written from a perspective that is the minority, right? That's fighting against the beast, is fighting against the Roman emperor, the Roman Empire, right? All this history of persecution is happening. And so here now, we are the Western, the Christian, the United States of America. People make comparisons all the time. United States is the new Rome or whatever. I don't know how valid that characteristic is, or that comparison is, but we are now on the majority side, right? Now we're the ones who are a national religion, if you will, to many extents, or the majority religion. So how does the perspective change, and what is the conversation like for the Muslims in our community who are maybe wondering the same thing, like, gosh, I have to keep my Christian neighbors on the good side because they think we're all terrorists, which is totally not true, right? I just wonder what that's like.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that point of clarification, because what I'm talking about is more the philosophical, the academic, the journalistic approach. Up until 20 years ago, Christianity was the privileged religion.
Right.
in the United States. And so we couldn't relate to these texts. But in the last 10 to 15 years, there's been a fundamental shift. And Christianity, you have this concept, some call it postmodernism, but the concept that toleration of everything is sort of a bottom line. And then a religion that has limits in its toleration becomes the object of intolerance. There's the intolerance of toleration. That Christianity is the one religion that is unacceptable because it has limits to its toleration.
Is that part of this nuns? They call about it the nuns, you know, none of the above.
Yeah.
Choose your religion, none of the above. And the percentage is huge now.
Well, but it's true. I mean, I talked to some of my friends, and a lot of them have left the church for various reasons, and some of them very valid in some senses. But at the same time, when they talk to me, a lot of them are like, how can you buy into that? Or how can you be part of such a judgmental crew? Like such a group of people that are so oppressive and so judgmental.
Yeah.
And they don't allow you to actually experience. And doesn't the Bible say we have freedom of choice and like all this stuff? And some of the points are very valid, but other times I'm like, man, your experience is so painful that, you know, it's justifiable because of the pain you've gone through in your experience here. But I don't think that's what we're here for. I don't think that's what Christianity stands on. And I think that's what you're saying is that...
Yeah, in the media, in academia, even in politics, the Christian perspective, as you say, sometimes for good reasons, is increasingly being demonized. And on the other hand, Islam, I think, is a challenging thing to be a Muslim in America whenever there's a terrorist attack. No question about that. But at the academic level, at the media level, Islam is favored over Christianity today. That doesn't mean that's good for them or bad for Christians, but the reality is that there's a big shift coming.
I still think we should just, again, I don't know if I'm fully with you. I mean, I've heard it said, like, when equality starts happening, the one who was privileged before feels like it's inequality, right? And that's kind of an awful paraphrase, but I know there's a line that's especially been used in race issues that have been ongoing right now. But I feel like we should keep that in mind, that maybe if Christianity was privileged before, kind of the equality that might be happening may feel hard for us, but maybe that's
Are you thinking about in an American context or around the world?
A United States context.
Okay. Well, and that's a little different.
That's a different context.
And like, I think there is something that we should just keep in mind with that is that, I mean, anywhere you go, every belief system is going to always feel like they're the ones kind of attacked. And so it's hard to be completely fair or like
we're going to a country next year where we have to submit our sermons ahead of time. We can only preach so many nights. I can't bring medical people. I can't do this and this and this. Long list because it's not allowed. You know, so I don't know what your context was.
No, we're not in that situation at all. But I think Christians are beginning to sense what it's like to be the odd man out in society, and it is happening.
Well, you would be embarrassed in a group to admit that you were a full-throated Christian.
Historically, the number one freedom has always been freedom of conscience. Historically, but that freedom of conscience is no longer number one in the courts today. Equality is number one, as you pointed out. Maybe it should be, but the reality is that is a change. And if your conscience isn't free, can you truly be free?
Right.
If you can't live your conscience, you know, that's the challenge. And anyway, it's good conversation.
It is good conversation.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if we can I don't know if we can do this quickly or not, but during the break, we wrestled with the question, because we had discussed with Nicolaitans before, is that God doesn't say he hates the Nicolaitans themselves. He hates their practices. And other times in the Bible, he said, I'm angry at you because you're ripping off the poor. You're not caring for the divorced people, the old widows. So there are things that God gets angry about. But so we talked about, does God hate the sin but love the sinner? But that has been used to hurt people. We talked about immediately context, homosexuality. People have said, okay, you can love the person, but hate what they do. I'm sure that doesn't feel very good. So say some more. Where do you think we should go? What's a generalizable principle that we can use here?
That's
too
a lot.
hard.
That's a lot to
We're
ask.
not going to
I don't know
solve
if I have that.
homosexual Christian how we should feel here.
I just think when you brought up the line,
Love the sin,
love
hate the sinner.
hate the sin, right? I was thankful that Dr. Pauline brought up a little bit of hesitation there and said, well, that's kind of a limited
Cliche.
saying, a cliche. Let's be careful there. But my conversation during the break was just the disappointment that I've experienced personally with how we oftentimes marginalize homosexual people, claiming that something that's so clear to so core to their identity as a human being, and we assume that that is lesser than, or that is destructive, or that is detrimental. And I've just seen so much hurt and pain in my friends and people who aren't my friends, but I see it in the world around me. I wonder if that is a fair thing to use.
Who they are,
if that cliche is fair to use in that
So who they are and
context.
what they do are so inextricably linked
Right.
that you can't very well separate loving them and disagreeing with their behavior.
Well, I think that we should be disappointed by it, and we should be frustrated and discourage things that withdraw from well-lived life, and things that hurt, and things that bring pain, and things that destroy life, right? But I'm not sure the practice of homosexuality is one of those things. I think that giving everybody a fair opportunity to love and to experience communion and all those things is actually something that brings fuller life to that person and their mate.
So we have
and
to be
that
careful.
makes us uncomfortable, but I think for them, that's actually something that brings more life.
So we choose carefully when we throw that line out.
This is the opinion of Andrew Gorhese.
Well, the point is
Send
well
emails.
taken. If you take the cliche, hate the sin, love the sinner, what do you do with the sins that a person feels are part of their identity? You're no longer hating just the sin, you see. So, and I'm reminded of a comment Ellen White makes, and I just love the way she approaches some of these things. And she says, don't put God on trial for the language chosen in the scriptures. Now, John presents these as the words of Jesus, and so we have to take it very seriously. It's Jesus that says, I hate the works of the Nicolaitans, you see. But John is writing. He's using his own words. Jesus was not so much dictating here, but giving him a vision and allowing him to express it. How do we know? Am I just making that up? How do I know this is not Jesus' choice of words? Because there's bad grammar. When you know the Greek, the English goes over that, but the Greek of Revelation has some really unfortunate grammar, even in the words of God and Jesus at times. So this is not language that God would choose to ideally express himself, but he's using language for our sakes to make a point. So perhaps, using this text as a basis for hating the sin, loving the sinner, maybe is taking it a bit too far. So I appreciate the
I think we have to be careful with it. I was just thinking of an analogy. If when I was dating your aunt, who's now my wife, if she had said to me, I love you, but I really hate your baldness, you can't separate those things out. That's what I am.
That's
And
good.
if you can somehow love me, but not that, that's difficult for me because I am both those things.
Yeah.
And I think we'd have to be careful with that. Does that analogy get close?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. And I think we have to be very careful. But if I hear someone who has violated Title IX and has raped a girl against her wishes, and I say, I love you, my brother, but that was bad. That's wrong. I think that line, the line of fits, then God loves the sinner but hates the sin. That's not okay.
And when we describe sin, the definition is things that destroy life. But when it's something that brings life, that's not a sin. That's
which is another
an
show.
experience.
But I understand your heart. Yes,
Well, Andrew, I
yes.
appreciate your compassion there very much, and I think I'd love to see more of it in a lot of Christian people.
Amen.
Okay, I would want to just rephrase one thing, not rephrase it, but just say the same thing can be said from another direction that maybe would be a little more balanced, at least in some people's minds. And that is, another way you can approach all of this is, as Paul does in Romans 1, he recognizes that the practice of homosexuality is contrary to nature and contrary to creation. All right, now that sounds really brutal, all right, and really narrowing it down until you realize that that is an example of about 30 sins that do the same. And heterosexual people can be contrary to nature when they have sex out of marriage. They can be contrary to nature within a dysfunctional marriage. In other words, that concept of contrary to nature or contrary to creation, Paul spreads to a whole lot of other areas. And I think the problem is that, and this is what I sense you're fighting against, and I appreciate that, is that often Christians, when they talk about homosexuality, they single it out as this uniquely reprehensible sin above all others, okay? And Paul doesn't do that. The Bible doesn't do that. It recognizes it as one of a long list. So the other way to phrase it would not be, well, any way that a person feels they build themselves up is good. And I think there's a point to that, and I think that expresses how people feel. The other side is that everything we do is broken and needs to be confronted as broken. But if you're going to confront a homosexual for their behavior, I would say you'd better do it from a standpoint of common brokenness. It's one broken person to another saying, hey, you know, we're all in a mess together. Is there some way that I can help? You know, whereas if you come at it, well, you're broken, I'm not. That is unbiblical, it's unfair,
Very careful.
and it's cruel.
I appreciate. Thank you for listening.
Is that any help?
Thank you. Good, good.
No,
And
like,
good
I mean,
questions.
come back on it. Is that any help? I mean,
There's some fundamental things.
I want to make sure this is not a show about homosexuality. We didn't come prepared for that.
You're right.
None of us came prepared for that discussion, and they didn't come prepared for it. So if you want to respond, I think, quickly to that, but we're not going to go any further down that one subject. Go ahead.
I thank you for responding, and I value what you say. That's
I think if someone writes, or we want to target a show that we all read and study and come prepared to do that, but let's not do it on the fly. I think it's too important of a subject that we're not ready for.
I think there is a greater principle that we can all take away from it, though, and I think that's what we've been talking about here, is this concept of holistic love, and like our focus and how we treat people and how we respect people and how we disrespect people, and how, you know, in this, God is talking about specific things that he's trying to encourage people out of or away from, because in their context, in their very real community, it's something they're struggling with. And so I think it's easy to take that and apply it wherever it's easy for us to go, but I think that this concept of holistic love and being able to refocus constantly on what God is asking us to do in our personal walk, if we all took that to heart, then we would be a group of way better people than people that are dictating generalizations. And so, like, I think that out of this conversation and about what we're talking about right now, I think that's like one of the things that we can kind of, I think, all move with and agree that we all have work to do, and we all have like a...
Good, good.
and keep in mind that the one who wrote, I hate these works, is also the one who gravitated to the outcasts when he
Right.
was on this earth.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right, and that's where I think the context is so important.
I wanted to finish this church coming back to the question of how did you handle suffering and persecution, and to be thou faithful unto death. In very practical terms, we all do this every single week. I took you to visit an old man dying a few nights ago, and we had the funeral today. What do we say to someone who doesn't seem to be experiencing a miracle, doesn't seem to be getting well or finding a husband or getting a job when they want a job so desperately, and they're suffering? It's just hurting. What is it that we can say with some assurance that would really be helpful in light of this particular passage? Okay, I don't mean all chaplaincy, all options. In light of this passage, what do you say?
I would point out verse 11. It says, he that hath an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. He who conquers will not be hurt by the second death. And when you go deeply into Revelation, you realize that this death that we know about is not the final thing. It's not to be feared because it's really only a transition. It's only a sleep. And so what happens to this person in this life may not have been all that great, but God is not finished with that person yet. So I think that would be the main point. If a person is dying and so on, they can die whole if they understand that the experience that they are having is not the end and it's not the total picture.
You know what's interesting, and just to throw a complete curveball in there, I just had a conversation with a young man who said that one of the things that scares him the most about Christianity, and even though we have this beautiful message of hope and stuff like that, is the concept of the afterlife. He was like, heaven is terrifying to me, and I just don't know if I want to be there. And I'm like, well, now what do I say? Because, you know, like, that's what we're supposed to give hope with, you know? Like, that's the, like, saving thing, you know? Like, here, you have hope for the future. And he's like, I'd prefer not having all these, like, he didn't say speculations, but all these random concepts being thrown at me, saying, this will be your reward, this will be this. And he was like, it's scary to me. That scares me, and I don't want to die.
He says, I'd rather be in a bar with my friends in front of a warm fire.
Right, he was like, basically, he's like, why be perfect, you know, and like avoid all these things. So anyways, it's just a terrifying concept. And so I think that there's stuff that we have to struggle with here, even in that concept of pushing afterlife talk is, you know, it's speculation. I mean, some of it's stated, but also, again, context and what people do know.
But it is the heart of our faith. We do believe it'll be fantastic, and people will be restored and will be redeemed, and God will make up for suffering. Whatever it is, with Gold Street, whatever, we don't know all those things.
Right.
But clearly it is a great hope, just to say, if you are suffering today for 10 days, someday we're going to give you something beyond the second death. So that is at least part of it.
Yeah.
What about the be faithful part? My Uncle Maury was going around the country the last couple of years of his career, Maury Venden, and saying, do you have enough faith for when God doesn't do the miracle? And he told a long story about a young man, his son's friend, who prayed and prayed and prayed and did not get well. And do your faith handle that? Are you still faithful? Was John the Baptist still faithful when you're being persecuted? When Peter's in prison and isn't always going to get out, are you still faithful? Is that helpful or not?
I just know for me, whenever things go wrong, I try not to view it as a personal attack from the universe. Like, I realize that there's typically, I mean, yes, I have problems that are beyond control of humanity, but at the same time, when I get in a fight, or if something bad happens to, you know, if someone gets hurt in a car accident or something like that, it's not the universe necessarily, you know, it's not like an attack from God or Satan or whatever. I think that there's, you know, also just a...
Fair enough. Can we say that clearly? This is not coming from God.
Yeah.
You're not only something that God has chosen for this thing, that we live in a difficult world, but someday he is going to do this and this and this. Yeah. In the meantime, be faithful. God is still worth living and loving, and God will redeem as much of it as possible in this world. Yes, those are all things that have been said the last couple shows. We're down to a few seconds left. Somehow we always get to this point wishing we could go on, but we will come back together again on GPS. Write us. We would love to hear from you. So GPS@LLBN.tv. And if you want to take us to task, if you want to push in another point, if you want to ask for clarification or something new, we'll have a whole show on questions. God bless you. Thanks for watching.